The press conference room was packed, buzzing with the energy of flashing cameras, heated questions, and the swagger of an undefeated UFC champion who believed the world revolved around him. He leaned back in his chair, sunglasses on indoors, chewing gum like he was the king of the fight game. Every word he spoke dripped with arrogance, and the crowd of reporters soaked it up. But then, without warning, he dropped a line that silenced the room. "Forget the contenders. Forget the belt. I'll tell you who I really want to fight." He paused, smirked, and pointed toward the audience. "That old man sitting back there, Steven Seagal." The cameras instantly swiveled. There in the second row sat the legendary action star, calm, still, dressed in his usual black jacket, hands folded neatly, eyes hidden behind tinted glasses. He hadn't spoken a word all evening, just observing quietly as though he didn't belong in the noisy, chaotic circus of MMA hype. The champion leaned forward, grinning wide. "Yeah, I said it. I'll knock you out, Grandpa. All those movie tricks won't save you in a real cage fight." Laughter rippled across the room. Reporters chuckled nervously. Some even egged him on with shouts. "Would you really fight Seagal?" The fighter shrugged, raising his arms cockily. "Why not? He's been running his mouth for years about teaching fighters. Let's see if he can still move without a stunt double." The insult cut deep, not just at Seagal but at the millions who grew up idolizing him as a martial arts icon. For a brief moment, the legendary figure remained motionless, expression unreadable. Then slowly, his head tilted, just enough for the faint glint of his glasses to catch the spotlight. He didn't answer, didn't rise, didn't even smirk. His silence was louder than words. The champion slammed a fist on the table. "What's wrong, old man? Cat got your tongue? Or are you afraid?" His words dripped with venom and the crowd roared again. Phones raised high, live streams exploding across social media. What should have been a routine press event had turned into something much bigger. The disrespect was public, undeniable, and unforgettable. And in that silence, tension began to simmer, because the world suddenly wondered, would Steven Seagal answer the challenge? The laughter from the press conference didn't fade quickly. Phones kept recording, tweets kept flying, and within minutes, clips of the arrogant UFC champion calling out Steven Seagal were already viral. Memes popped up online mocking the actor's age, comparing him to grandpas at the park. The disrespect wasn't just spoken, it spread like wildfire. In the middle of it all, Steven Seagal sat quietly, hands folded in his lap. He hadn't come to this event for attention. In fact, no one expected him to be there at all. He'd arrived quietly, without an entourage, without a press badge, just a guest who wanted to watch the chaos of modern fight hype. For him, it was another night, another reminder of how different the world of martial arts had become. But for the UFC champion, it was an opportunity. He smelled blood. "You know what's funny?" he sneered, turning back to the microphone. "These old legends think respect is automatic. Now respect is earned in the cage. And you," he jabbed a finger toward Seagal. "You haven't been in a real fight in decades. You're a movie star, not a martial artist. You're living off nostalgia. Admit it." The words landed heavy. Some reporters laughed again, but others shifted uncomfortably. They knew who Seagal was, not just the action star, but the man who had trained law enforcement, the martial artist with decades of practice under his belt, the teacher whose name carried weight across dojos worldwide. Yet in this moment, his reputation was being shredded for cheap applause. Still, Seagal didn't flinch. His calmness almost made the insult sharper, as if silence itself became a shield. But that silence wasn't enough to protect his dignity. One young reporter, eager to make a name for himself, shouted from the back, "Seagal, are you going to take this? Are you really just going to sit there while he calls you out?" The question broke the thin barrier of respect still lingering in the room. Others chimed in, mocking in tone. "Yeah, come on, Seagal, show us a kata." Another teased. Laughter rippled again. The UFC champion grinned wider, feeding on the energy. He leaned back, arms wide like a king basking in his throne of mockery. "See, even the crowd knows. Your time is done. This is my era now. And if you don't like it..." He mimed, throwing a punch in Seagal's direction. "Then step up, Grandpa." That was the moment innocence broke. Not because Seagal was a child or helpless, but because a room filled with professionals, journalists, fans, and fighters, allowed a lifetime of discipline and mastery to be ridiculed like a schoolyard taunt. The man who had once been revered was being laughed at, stripped of dignity by arrogance and the crowd's hunger for entertainment. On social media, the divide was already forming. Clips showed Seagal sitting silently, contrasted with the champion's bold insults. Some users piled on, "Yeah, he's old, he'd get wrecked." Others came to Seagal's defense. "Respect your elders. That man could still fold you in half." The debate grew heated. Hashtags started trending, and yet Seagal himself remained motionless, as though none of it mattered. But inside the press room it mattered. Every cruel chuckle chipped away at the respect that should have been unshakable. The man who had taught countless fighters discipline and honor was being reduced to a punchline. The UFC champion stood up suddenly, grabbing the mic from the table. "In fact, I'll make it official," he boomed. "If this so-called legend has the guts, I'll fight him. Exhibition, cage, mat, anywhere, anytime. And I promise you, I'll end it in the first round. No stunts, no edits, just reality." The audience erupted. Reporters typed furiously. Cameras zoomed in. Live stream chats exploded with fire emojis and bets. This wasn't just trash talk anymore, it was a challenge, a declaration. And still, Steven Seagal didn't answer. He sat quietly, hands folded, the very image of calm in the middle of a storm. But in that calm, something was shifting. The world wanted to know, was his silence acceptance? Or was it the stillness before the storm? The room was electric, but not in the way it should have been. Instead of respect, the air buzzed with mockery. Steven Seagal remained seated, calm as a stone, while the arrogant UFC champion paraded around the stage like a gladiator who had already claimed victory without even stepping into the arena. The journalists leaned into one another, whispering, "Did you hear that? He called him Grandpa. He actually challenged him to a fight? This is insane. I mean, maybe he's right. Seagal's old now. He couldn't handle this guy." Their voices weren't loud, but in the stillness of Seagal's silence, every murmur felt amplified. A few younger fans in the back snickered openly, their laughter like daggers stabbing at the dignity of a man who had once been untouchable. The legendary Aikido master wasn't just being insulted, he was being dismissed. One businessman in a tailored suit, sipping on an expensive coffee, barely looked up from his phone. Why's he even here? He doesn't belong at a UFC presser. His words, careless and dismissive, carried the weight of arrogance shared by many in the room. Another woman leaned toward her colleague, smirking. "Entitlement starts early, huh? He thinks he deserves respect just because of old movies." That was the cruel irony. The same man who had spent decades teaching discipline, respect and control was now being branded entitled for simply existing quietly in a space where he hadn't asked for attention. And yet, Seagal didn't speak. He didn't rise. His silence seemed to irritate the champion even more. The fighter smirked, feeding on the whispers. "See, even the crowd knows I'm right. Nobody believes you can hang with me, old man. The world moves on and you're still stuck in the past." The audience didn't cheer, but they didn't defend Seagal either. Their silence was agreement, or worse, apathy. That silence screamed louder than words, and in the viral age, it was as damning as any punch. Phones kept recording. Streams kept rolling. Millions of viewers at home watched as Steven Seagal became the target of a younger generation's ridicule. Some typed laughing emojis, others typed harsh words. "Sit down, boomer. This champ's got no chill. Seagal's washed. He wouldn't last 10 seconds, but not everyone laughed." A smaller voice, buried among the noise, spoke differently. In the corner of the room, an older fan shook his head. "They don't know who they're mocking. That man's forgotten more about fighting than this kid will ever learn." His words went unheard, drowned beneath the roar of online mockery and in-person whispers. The silence of respect was deafening. The absence of defenders made Seagal's position feel lonelier. The man who had once been a towering icon now sat still, surrounded by flashing cameras and a sea of judgmental faces. The UFC champion seized on it. He banged the mic against his palm. "You hear that, Seagal? Nobody's stopping me. Nobody's standing up for you. You're alone, washed, finished." His grin widened as if the silence of the crowd had handed him victory. On a silver platter, the whispers grew sharper. He should just leave. This is embarrassing. Why won't he just admit he's done? And still, Seagal remained motionless. His calmness, infuriating to the arrogant fighter, was misunderstood by the crowd as weakness. They couldn't see it for what it truly was. Discipline, restraint, and the confidence of a man who didn't need to prove himself with words. But to the watching world, perception was reality. The whispers, the smirks, the careless judgment, they painted the picture of an aging legend being outclassed by youthful arrogance. It was the perfect storm of disrespect. And in that storm, Steven Seagal's silence became unbearable. Not because it was weakness, but because it left the audience desperate for an answer. Would he rise? Would he speak? Would he accept the challenge, or was he going to let the world believe the whispers? The tension was unbearable. And somewhere deep inside the press room, a shift began. Not in Seagal's body, but in the atmosphere. The silence that mocked him was about to become the silence that feared him. The press conference should have ended. The questions were done, the headlines already written, but nobody moved. The energy in the room had shifted into something strange. A quiet unease, like a storm cloud gathering over an open field. Steven Seagal still hadn't moved from his seat. His arms were folded, his breathing calm, his face unreadable behind dark-tinted glasses. The UFC champion continued pacing the stage, thriving on the silence, mistaking it for victory. "What's the matter, Seagal?" he taunted again. "You scared? Afraid I'll expose you in front of the whole world?" He flexed his fists for the cameras, shadowboxing with exaggerated motions. The crowd laughed, clapping half-heartedly. But as the cameras zoomed in on Seagal, a subtle detail caught the eye of those who were paying attention. One of the security guards, big, broad-shouldered, the type who looked like he'd never blinked at trouble, shifted uneasily. His posture changed the moment Seagal tilted his head slightly. The guard swallowed hard as though he knew something the others didn't. Reporters noticed. They whispered, "Did you see that? Why's the guard looking nervous?" He knows something. Look at him, he won't take his eyes off Seagal. The champion didn't notice. He was too caught up in his performance. He strutted across the stage, microphone in hand. "You're nothing but a relic, Seagal. A prop from the 90s still pretending to be relevant. Step in the cage with me and I'll put you down faster than your last box office flop." The crowd laughed again, but this time, not as loudly. The laughter wavered. The tension in the room was starting to ripple. It wasn't Seagal's silence that unsettled them. It was the reactions around him. In the corner, a young fighter, barely 20, leaned toward his coach. "Why is he just sitting there? Doesn't he care?" The coach's eyes stayed fixed on Seagal. He shook his head slowly. "Careful, kid. That's not silence. That's patience. And patience is dangerous." Social media exploded as the live stream captured it all. Comments flooded in. "Why's the guard sweating? Seagal's not even blinking." That's terrifying. This is the calm before the storm. A clip went viral mid-conference. Seagal's subtle shift of posture, barely noticeable, but enough to send a trained security guard on edge. TikTok was flooded with slow-motion replays, dramatic music overlays, captions like, "He knows what's about to happen." Meanwhile, the UFC champion had no idea. He continued barking insults, soaking in the attention. He even jumped down from the stage, striding closer to where Seagal sat. The camera scrambled to follow, lights flashing wildly. The crowd leaned forward, hungry for confrontation. "Look at you," the fighter sneered, standing just a few feet away now. "You won't even stand up. That's the difference between us. I fight, you hide." For the first time all night, Steven Seagal moved. Slowly, deliberately, he removed his glasses and folded them neatly in his lap. His eyes, sharp and cold, locked onto the champion. The silence in the room grew heavier. Even the buzzing of cameras seemed distant. The champion's smirk faltered just slightly, but he quickly puffed his chest. "What, you finally gonna say something?" Seagal didn't answer. Instead, he adjusted his jacket sleeve. For a brief moment, the faint outline of a patch was visible beneath the cuff, an insignia only a handful of people in the room recognized. The same insignia tied to law enforcement, to elite training academies, to the kind of people who didn't play games. The nervous guard took a step forward, almost as if to intervene, but stopped himself. His eyes darted to the patch, then back to Seagal's expression. He knew what it meant. And suddenly the guard wasn't nervous about Seagal's safety. He was nervous for the champion. Whispers grew louder. "What was that symbol? Did you see the patch? Wait. Seagal still works with..." Suspense twisted in the air like a tightened rope. The champion laughed nervously, forcing bravado back into his voice. "Nice trick. Still trying to scare people with props, huh? Won't work on me, old man." He stepped closer, toe-to-toe with Seagal now, the crowd gasping at his audacity. And still, Seagal said nothing. His silence was no longer mistaken for weakness, it had become unbearable. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, the whispers growing frantic, the livestream comments exploding in real time. Something was coming. Everyone could feel it. The arrogance of the UFC champion had lit a fire he didn't understand. And as the cameras rolled, the world leaned in, waiting for the inevitable. The hidden signal had been given. The storm was no longer approaching. It was already here. The press room was no longer buzzing with excitement, it was suffocating with tension. The UFC champion stood just inches from Steven Seagal, grinning like a predator convinced the hunt was already over. Cameras flashed, reporters leaned over tables, and fans watching online spammed the live chat with fire emojis and disbelief. But then, Seagal moved. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't theatrical. He simply set his glasses aside, pushed back his chair, and rose to his full height. The room went dead silent. For the first time that night, the champion faltered. He hadn't realized how tall Seagal really was. He towered above most men, his broad frame casting a shadow across the fighter. His posture was calm, but his presence, it was overwhelming. The champion quickly masked his nerves with a smirk. "Finally. Thought you'd never stand up. Let's see if you can still move, Grandpa." Seagal didn't respond. Instead, he adjusted his jacket sleeve again, the insignia flashing once more. This time the cameras caught it clearly. Within seconds, social media was ablaze. Wait, isn't that the mark for tactical training? Didn't Seagal train law enforcement in real combat? Bro, he's not just an actor. The whispers in the room grew urgent. I heard he trained fighters who went on to dominate MMA. Didn't Anderson Silva credit him for that front kick knockout? Yeah, John Jones too. Seagal taught them techniques. The arrogant fighter's grin wavered as the weight of those words hit. He had thought this was a washed-up action star, but the truth was standing right in front of him. A man whose influence had quietly shaped champions, whose knowledge reached deeper than Hollywood. Seagal finally spoke. His voice was calm, low, and carried like thunder through the silent room. You mistake fame for strength. You mistake silence for fear. But in my world, arrogance always pays a price. The words weren't shouted. They weren't dramatic. But they struck harder than any punch. The champion's smirk broke, his bravado faltering as the crowd reacted with a collective gasp. Then came the escalation. The UFC president, seated at the stage, suddenly leaned into his mic. If you're serious about this, if you really want to prove yourself, we can make it happen. Exhibition match. You and Seagal, no stunts. No excuses. The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Fans screamed. The livestream chat exploded. No way! Book it now. Seagal versus UFC champion. History. The champion puffed up his chest, desperate to reclaim control. You're on. I'll embarrass him in the first round. He jabbed a finger toward Seagal. Don't back out now, old man. The world's watching. But Seagal didn't flinch. He simply nodded once. Emotion so controlled it sent shivers through the crowd. Be careful what you ask for, he said softly. The security guard who had been nervous earlier took a subtle step back, as if he knew what was about to unfold in the coming days. The coach in the corner whispered to his fighter, "This kid doesn't understand. He thinks he's fighting a man. What he's really fighting is decades of discipline and skill sharpened to a blade." Social media couldn't get enough. Hashtags trended worldwide. Seagal vs champ. Grandpa fight. Respect the legend. Clips of Seagal's quiet rise from his chair played on repeat, fans slowing it down frame by frame, analyzing every movement as though decoding a hidden message. The champion tried to turn the energy back to himself. He posed for cameras, flexing his muscles, promising knockouts. But the audience wasn't looking at him anymore. Their eyes were fixed on Seagal, who had returned to his seat, as calm as he had been when the insults first started. And that was the true reveal. Power wasn't in shouting, in flexing, or in throwing wild threats. Power was in composure, in patience, in the way the room had shifted, no longer laughing at Seagal but waiting on his every move. The fight hadn't even been scheduled yet, and already the balance of power had changed. The champion, once the center of attention, now looked like a reckless child. Seagal, silent and steady, looked like the storm waiting to break. The escalation was complete. What had begun as a joke had become a spectacle the world couldn't ignore. And in that moment, everyone knew, when the cage doors finally closed, arrogance would meet something it couldn't laugh at. Discipline forged in silence. The buildup was electric. Within days of the press conference, the story had exploded across every platform. ESPN ran headlines like Seagal versus UFC champion. Late-night talk shows cracked jokes. Memes flooded TikTok. Pay-per-view interest skyrocketed. The UFC president, sensing gold, moved fast. A special exhibition was announced. Steven Seagal versus the reigning arrogant UFC champion. Not for a belt. Not for rankings. For pride. For respect. For the answer to a question nobody thought they'd ever ask. Could an aging martial arts legend still silence a brash, undefeated fighter in his prime? The arena was sold out. Celebrities filled the front rows. Millions tuned in worldwide. The champion strutted toward the cage, fireworks bursting behind him, muscles flexed, arrogance dripping from every gesture. He held up a custom t-shirt with the words, "Bye-bye, Grandpa." The crowd booed, but he smirked. He thrived on being hated. Then came Seagal. No music, no flashing lights, just the quiet sound of footsteps as he walked toward the cage in his black jacket. Calm as ever, no entourage, no theatrics. He didn't need them. His presence alone was enough. The crowd erupted, not with laughter this time, but with respect. The cage door shut. The bell rang. The champion rushed forward, fists blazing, hungry to end it quickly. He threw wild combinations, hooks, jabs, kicks, everything in his arsenal. But Seagal didn't move like a man his age should. He didn't flinch. He didn't panic. He simply shifted, redirecting strikes with effortless precision. Each attack slid past him like water around stone. The crowd gasped. Commentators screamed, "Look at that defense. He hasn't even thrown a strike yet. He's making him miss everything." The champion grew frustrated. Sweat dripped down his forehead as his punches grew sloppier. He screamed mid-swing, "Fight me, old man." And then it happened. Seagal moved. With a blur of motion, he sidestepped a looping right hook, grabbed the champion's arm, and with a simple redirection, slammed him to the mat. The thud echoed through the arena. Gasps turned into roars. The champion scrambled to his feet, red-faced, humiliated, but Seagal wasn't done. The next rush ended with a wrist lock, twisting the champion to his knees. The next kick attempt was caught, spun, and redirected until the fighter crashed into the cage wall. Every movement was precise, efficient, devastating, not fueled by strength but by decades of mastery. The champion's arrogance turned to desperation. His punches slowed. His breathing grew heavy. He looked up, confused, as if realizing for the first time he wasn't fighting an old man. He was fighting a storm disguised in silence. Then came the final moment. The champion charged one last time, swinging wildly, rage overtaking reason. Seagal stepped aside, caught his momentum, and in one seamless motion swept him onto his back. The arena erupted as Seagal pinned him effortlessly, immobilizing him without even striking. The champion flailed, then tapped, once, twice, 3 times, his arrogance finally broken. The referee pulled them apart. The crowd exploded, chanting Seagal's name. Phones lit up. Social media went nuclear, clips spreading faster than wildfire. Grandpa makes champ tap out. Seagal stood, calm as always. No smile, no celebration. He simply adjusted his jacket and bowed slightly to the roaring crowd. The champion sat on the mat, humiliated, gasping for air, his face a mask of disbelief. The commentators summed it up perfectly. Discipline just schooled arrogance. This wasn't about age. This was about respect. The justice was complete. Not just in the cage, but in the eyes of millions who had doubted. The man mocked as irrelevant had silenced an entire generation of arrogance in a single exhibition. As Seagal left the cage, fans chanted louder, drowning out the boos aimed at the fallen champion. For once, the silence that had been mocked was now understood. Silence wasn't weakness. Silence was control. Silence was power. And the arrogant fighter, sitting alone in the spotlight, realized too late that he hadn't just lost a fight. He had lost his pride. The arena was still buzzing long after the fight ended. Fans cheered, cameras flashed, and commentators replayed the final moments again and again. But Steven Seagal didn't linger in the noise. He walked calmly down the tunnel, jacket still neatly pressed, face untouched by strain. Reporters swarmed, shouting questions. "Steven, how did you do it at your age? Was this fight personal? Do you think the champion deserves a rematch?" Seagal paused, turned slightly, and in his quiet voice answered only one thing. Respect is not about age. It's about discipline, and discipline never grows old. The clip went viral instantly. It wasn't just a victory, it was a statement. Meanwhile, the champion sat in the locker room, head in his hands. His knuckles were swollen, his pride shattered. For the first time in years, there were no cameras, no cheers, no bravado, just silence. He looked at his reflection in the mirror, and the man staring back wasn't the invincible warrior he thought he was. He was just a fighter who had underestimated a legend. Later, as the crowd filed out of the arena, a boy clutching a faded karate belt waited near the exit. When Seagal walked past, the boy nervously stepped forward and whispered, "Sir, thank you. You showed us that being calm doesn't mean being weak." For the first time that night, Seagal smiled. He placed his hand gently on the boy's shoulder and replied, "Strength is loud. Wisdom is quiet. Remember that." The boy's eyes lit up, and in that simple exchange, the lesson was sealed, not in highlight reels or headlines, but in the heart of someone who would carry it forward. By morning, the story had taken over the internet. Hashtags trended worldwide. Respect over arrogance, silence wins, Seagal still got it. But beneath the memes and laughter, one message stood above the rest. Arrogance may shine for a moment, but respect endures forever, and so, the fight that began as a joke ended as a legend, not because of punches or kicks, but because a so-called grandpa reminded the world of a truth it had forgotten. Moral: silent doesn't mean powerless. Respect the quiet ones, they may be the strongest in the room.